Hi, welcome back to class, and we are on now moving on to Module 4. And so this section is looking at tools of dominance, so it's looking at prejudice and discrimination. And as you can see, the class is starting off by looking at how people experience life differently based on where they're located, and so the biography intersects with their location and, of course, their time, so when they exist, so their history. And so we're going to look at some of the tools of dominance. And what we're going to do this week is we're going to look at healthcare, and we're going to look at politics, and there's going to be a podcast on Brown versus Board of Education, and that's a landmark case where we use a lot of we use that as a main pivot for looking at race relations in this country. But this podcast will look at what may have happened that was wrong with Brown versus Board of Education, and it's a very complicated case. But they look at some specific aspect of it that Gladwell actually says was probably implemented wrong. So what we're going to do is I'll go through the expectations of the week. I hope you're noticing at the class that looking at discrimination and prejudice, we're not just looking at these cases of somebody standing in someone's face and physically blocking them. Discrimination and prejudice can happen on a much more subtle level. So as you took your implicit bias test, I'm sure you were exposed to some biases you may have, which are normal. But these biases, they compound, and as people go through their days and they come across more people, if there's enough bias that comes across them, it could lead to a pretty bad day for someone. And so the implicit bias training is something that's done now more and more by people who have access to the public. So social workers, police departments are using it. If you take my public administration class, I'll discuss how the Las Vegas Police Department used implicit bias training to basically stop unwarranted shootings. And a lot of police departments had a problem with people being on the receiving end of implicit bias, and it happens in a very terrible way. So the Las Vegas Police Department implemented IAT training, and it had some great effects for them. So I want you to look at things like this I want you to think about things like this when you're thinking about implicit bias. So I hope you're getting the idea that racial discrimination doesn't always happen on something that can be pointed out as one instance. Usually it's the groups of things that compound. So as we're going to look at the dominance in our system, you're going to look at structures that are in place to maintain stratification. So what we're doing is we're building on past chapters and past cases to get a better understanding of interactions with people. So you're going to read chapter 3 of the text. Again, there's going to be a quiz attached to this, and this will happen almost every week, actually until the end of the semester. And we have a couple of weeks at the end where there is not going to be a quiz tied to the text. We're going to move on to some more some ideas that aren't in the textbook, and so there's going to be a couple of weeks without relying on the text at all. So you're going to read that. You're also at that same time going to be responding to the Module 3 discussion. So make sure you keep that up. And again, respond on 3 different days to each of the different threads. And the reason we're taking the break between days when you put your post down is it gives someone a chance to respond to you. As someone responds to you, you can actually have a discussion. So a response to a response will be considered a response as I'm grading this. So make sure you're responding to each other. It makes the assignment a lot easier. Then you're gonna have a TED Talk, and there's a link from NPR, which is an article, but I believe there is a podcast, so you don't have to actually read it. You can watch the cast. That should still be on there. If not, it's just a short article on the effects of racism in health. And there'll be a Dropbox with this, so it'll be a 1.5 to 1 page reflection on the TED Talk and the NPR article. After you do that Dropbox, you're going to listen to a podcast from Malcolm Gladwell. Give yourself about a half hour to listen to that, and there'll be a discussion post based on that podcast. There'll also be a Robin Thede video clip on gerrymandering, and if I have a chance, I try to use comedy in these classes just to make things not so serious, but she talks about serious issues with comedy, and there will be a discussion question on this as well. There'll be a Chapter 3 quiz, of course, and then you're going to post your 2 questions to the Module 4 discussion by Sunday at midnight. And so I want to get to the idea of the amount of Dropboxes I have. There's going to be probably a Dropbox every week, and some weeks there might be 2 of them. But what I have done at this class is I got rid of a term paper I used to have due at the end of the semester. And so we're getting rid of that, and we're doing the points this way. I think this gives us a better chance to build on knowledge from earlier in the class, and so you're not stuck doing a whole other assignment. So as we work our way down, here's the link to the NPR article, and I will show you if they have. I don't see it though, but there used to be a link to hear this on here, but it's a pretty short. Oh, actually, up here you just click on this and you'll have your podcast, so you can actually listen to this instead of reading it if you don't want to read it. Then we have our TED Talk. And so this gentleman here is a sociologist who studies public health. And what you're going to use is the article and his TED Talk to write a reflection discussing the consequences of racism on public health. So I want you to include the connection between implicit bias and life expectancy. This is important. Like I said, I want to build on prior knowledge, and so with this class, studies show that if you do this with a class, you end up learning more deep. And so we're going for deep learning. So I want you to be comfortable discussing concepts you hear early in the class later on. This is very important because in a couple of weeks, we're going to move out of these general discussions and cases and looking at race as a general term, and we're going to focus on individual ethnic groups. And I want you to be able to move ideas from one group to the other. Although these happen to groups in unique ways, they don't just happen in a vacuum. And so the experience of one group may be something you can relate to another group. So I want you to feel comfortable doing that. And then we get into comparative sociology, which is very fun to do. So we have our quiz up, and I have the dates way wrong on this. I'll get this fixed. And then here is the podcast from Malcolm Gladwell. This is from a series called Revisionist History. And what you do, as you're doing this, you'll just click on the play button, and you'll have the information. One thing about this site is there is a lot of extra information on here. For some reason, it's not loading on my page. I'll try to figure out why. Maybe it's because I have too many things running right now. But But there is extra information on this. So you'll play the podcast, and like I said, it's about half an hour, but it's going to look at the Brown versus Board of Education, and he gets a little critical on something that was missed with the lawsuit that should have been addressed from his analysis. Then we're going to watch another episode, The Rundown of Robin Thede. Again, she's a comedian, but she talks about social issues. And in this, she's going to look at gerrymandering. And if you're not familiar with gerrymandering, I do suggest you look it up. And if you don't know anything about it, send me an email. I can send you some information. But it's basically how districts are shaped to swing voters to certain districts, and it helps ensure safety for politicians in some districts, and is something that was done by both parties over time, but is pretty dirty politics. And it's gotten more complicated now, and she gets into that, how prisons were packed into districts to inflate numbers. So you're going to watch that, and it discusses schools and prisons, and is very content rich for a very short segment. But you'll have 2 discussion posts. One will be on this podcast, and the other one will be on the Robin Thede video. And then here's a link for general information on Brown versus Board of Education if you're interested. So if you have any questions, make sure you go ahead and get back to me. I did record a welcome video, and I have an issue where it's stuck on it's stuck on the camcorder. So I'm trying to get it off the digital recorder, but for some reason there's an issue. So if I do get it loaded, it will be posted right above the week's video. If not, I'll get it figured out in the next couple of days and have it on here. So in the meantime, thank you so much. And if you have any questions, make sure you send me an email, and I will get right back to you. Have a great week.